Hi, and welcome to the Inflectra webinar on Codeless Test Automation, Myth or Magic. My name's Adam Sandman, and I'm going to be the presenter today. And in today's webinar, we'll first be talking about the background to this challenge. How did we get these 10 features? Where did they come from? And what is the tool we'll be looking at? After that, we're going to go through each of the 10 features that a codeless automation tool should have and show you how our automation tool Rapise meets each of them, as well as some best practices along the way. After that, we'll have time at the end for our Q&A. So first, some background. Angie Jones put down this great blog a few months ago now, it must be, on the internet, talking about some different features that Codeless Test Automations tools should have, specifically those that distinguish them from some of the older record and play tools that you may remember from the 2000s, tools that I think gave test automation a bad name. And as a result of that, people then went down the route of using Selenium and coding everything, which is great and gives you a lot of control and power, but isn't so good if you don't have a programmer on hand. And so a lot of these codeless test automation tools that we have nowadays are trying to give non-programmers the ability to do test automation, but not make the tests as brittle and as hard to maintain as the tools of yesteryear did. And this is a great blog if you have a chance to read it. We'll put a link up on the website along with the recording. And in response to that, many vendors, including ourselves, published our responses to how do we take up that challenge. And so this white paper, 10 features every codeless test automation tool have, is our white paper response. And because of that, we thought, well, wouldn't it be a great topic for a webinar? And so here we are today. We're going to be doing a webinar to go through each of these different 10 features and show you what that means. That's our interpretation of what they means and how Rapise can solve them for you. So first of all, before we get into that, what actually is Rapise? It's our codeless test automation tool, and it is designed to test web applications, mobile applications, and traditional desktop applications. And those desktop applications can be Windows, Java, Qt, various different technologies. Today's focus is actually really on the web side of things, and if you look at the white paper and the original blog post, they really were focusing on web tools. However, the same principles do apply in terms of the maintenance and the reusability and the flow, and that's true for us. Certainly anything you can do in Rapise on a web application, you can do for mobile or desktop. So even though the focus today will be a website application, that doesn't mean the principles are unique to web only. So with that, we're going to jump into the first of the 10 different items. And what we'll do is we're going to be going to use a sample application that we have over here, which is our library information system. It's a web application that we've created to let you test out some basics of test automation. It's one of the samples that comes with Rapise. It's not the only one. There are some other samples as well that cover different types of technology, things like React and Angular. So there's different tools out there you can use to play around with. But for today's application, we're going to use this to create the building blocks. So with that being said, let's go back to our presentation. The first thing was smart element locators. And this is the case where you record a test against an application and it records some unique piece of information on the page, an ID, or maybe it's a cell locator, the fourth cell in the third row. And what happens is you reload the application, something changes, and it breaks. And we've all been there. It's the most frustrating part of test automation is you spend more time maintaining your test than it would have been to do it manually. So how do we solve that? Well, the idea is smart locators. And so that means, what is a locator? So to get going, let's go ahead and actually create a test and build out some locators. And the way Rapise works is you can create a new test. And oops, I'm going to be connecting it to our test management system, which is just unfortunately timed out. So let me reconnect to that. Go to Settings, go to Spira. So the tool we're using today is Rapise. I'm also going to be showing, to answer some of the later questions around continuous integration and reporting, our test management tool, Spira Team or Spira Test. So when you come across the term Spira Test or Spira Team, that's our web-based test management tool that goes with our automation tool. So I need to test the connection. Okay, there we go. It's connected. And now if I go File, New Test, it'll work a little bit better. And basically, I can now create a new test. So I'll put it in my regression test folder. There's some other tests in there before. I'll create a new test case. Sample codeless test. And I'm going to choose web because that's what we're doing today. And I'm using Firefox, but I could use any of the other browsers. We'll come back to that. And the last question it's going to ask me is, do I want to use what we call RVL? Now, RVL, or Rapise Visual Language, is our codeless technology. And you can create a test in RVL, in a codeless methodology, or you can create it in a pure coded methodology, JavaScript in this case. So we do offer both. That's recognizing that a lot of users will like a codeless approach, but some other users may prefer to use a scripting language for all of the testing, and they can still take advantage of the object repository and other common features. So since today's webinar is on codeless, let's choose the codeless option. Okay, and let's have a look. What does that give us? Well, that's our codeless test flow, as it's called. And inside Rapise, I'll close these tabs off, we have what's called the flow, the type, the object, the action. And this is where each of the parts of what you'd call a script effectively live. So each action you're going to perform, each verification, conditions, things like that will all appear here. So as I said, the first thing we're talking about is smart locators. So to do locating, we have to actually put a test together. So let's start by recording some simple steps. So we're going to hit record. And when the recorder comes up, I'm going to hit the login button. Give it a second to do that. Okay. And I'll do it slowly for the video. You can do it faster than this in real life. I'm logging in with the sample user librarian. Okay, looking good so far. And we now want to do some verification. So I am jumping ahead to another piece we'll talk about later, but verification is an important part of a test. So let's go in and verify something on the page. So I'm going to go here and do Control and 1 to verify. And I want to verify the text. So we'll come back to that a little bit later on. And we're going to create a book. So let's go in here, create a book. Let's put in the name of the book. And we'll call it Book 1. And it's going to be historical fiction. We'll insert that. And we want to verify Book 1. Control and 1. There we go. There we go. And important thing in testing is to also make sure that the test is self-cleaning. So we'll log out to get us back to the same point we started. Okay, hit finish. Okay, that's a simple test. I'll append it to the end. And that's the foundation of recording a codeless test. And before we go into some of the specific questions and the 10 points, just to orient you what's going on, we have inside the tool an object tree on the left. These are the items that we interacted with. Right here. This is the script, the flow, as it were, of using these objects to perform test actions. And obviously it recorded some actions for me, but that's not the only way you can do things. You can also just learn objects on the page, and once they're on the page, you can go here and say, let's say I want to click on a link. I can go down here, click, and drag it over here. Or if I don't like to do drag and drop, I can also just pick it from the list and browse the actions. Like that. So say I want to do double click. So it's very easy to create tests, both having Rapise build the test for you using a traditional record approach, or you can basically learn objects and then drag them and drop them to compose your own test. So that's the sort of simplest case of building a simple end-to-end flow. So now then, let's go back to the first thing we want to talk about then, smart element locators. So it looks like magic, and that was the topic of today's webinar, myth or magic, and we believe the answer it's neither. It's neither magic nor myth. Codeless test automation does work, but it isn't magic. So when you look at any of these objects, they have what's called an XPath or locator. And so if you go to, let's say, this drop-down, some locators are good, like this one. It's selecting it based on the name and the ID of a drop-down. And that ID is pretty stable, and most likely if we change the drop-down or change the page layout, unless we change the ID, that's going to work well. Some other things may not work quite so well. So for example, if I go to the this one here, the link, that's the link when we click the book management. That's clicking on the second item in the navigation bar, and it's a hyperlink. So that works unless our navigation bar is dynamic and changes based on permission, in which case you might click on the wrong thing. So that would not be a good locator. So when we talk about smart locators, there's two different ways we think about that. One is we can have you as the tester as you're recording, provide some smartness into things. So how does that work? So let's go back in. I'll log in here. And actually, one thing I can do is rather than logging in by hand, let me leverage the power of automation and actually have it log in for me. So I can select up to here, and I can say play selection. Let it log in for me. Okay, there we go. And then I want to go, oh, I forgot, it logged out also. Okay, perfect. So let me go in here. And what we can do now is we can look at this and say, okay, what does this page look like? So what are these locators? So when I do record now, instead of just clicking on a link or on blindly letting Rapise choose something, I can have some control over what locator it's going to use. Hit the spy tool, and I'll track, and let's look at, say, this hyperlink. Okay, so Rapise is actually giving me here several different locators I can use, and if I was to double click on it, it will show me the default one it's going to use based on its intelligence. And it's using a hyperlink locator where we're using the name of the page and the ID. And assuming that we're not going to be refactoring our URLs, and assuming that the IDs in the system are good and stable, like each book has a unique ID, that's actually a pretty decent locator. Certainly it's reasonable. If you look at this one over here, this one here is not so good. It's the third row, second cell. That definitely is not a good option. If we resort the grid, it's going to break. However, it's suggesting alternatives here. This is a better one here. Let's use the inner text of it. There's no ID on this particular element, so there's nothing really better than probably the text, which is the ID of the book. Imagine it's an ISBN or something. We hit test that. That's a good locator. We can hit learn, and guess what? We've now learned that object, and we've learned it using a locator that we know is stable. So that's another option. That's a smarter locator, and I will pin that. Okay, now the next thing you might want to say is, well, that's great, but I don't want to do that every single time. Okay, that's good. There are options where you can go in here and you can tell it which XPath to learn. Should we always use the text? Should we always use ARIA? Should we always use the ID? If we know our application will always be best off using a certain one of those 6 different flavors, then we can use that, and the system will automatically use that every time. That's okay. However, that still might not be good, because maybe different controls on the page are different. Some have good IDs and some don't. That's a bit of a broad approach. So the last thing we have, which is relatively new, is the ability to create what's called a web profile. And this is really good because it lets you use your knowledge of the application to train Rapise. And what you'll do is create a profile like this, and all you do is you're telling Rapise which attributes should we use, which attributes should we ignore, and what conditions should we place on it. And it's a series of JSON profiles that you create for each application. And so if you're creating a test against an application, you build out this profile, and Rapise will then know how should it record the objects. And in this case, this is the default. What we're saying is use an ID unless the ID is empty, well, then obviously we don't use it. Also, if it's just numbers, don't use it, because an ID that's just numbers is probably temporary, or a session ID or something that is not going to work. We can use the title, we can use the role, which is the ARIA role attribute. These are good. And we might use the content. We can also have exclusions as well, like this one. So you can use a mixture of includes and excludes to tell Rapise what are the best ways of finding it. And this is a very extensible system that we have. And so it lets you tell Rapise when you're using and recording and playing back, what should we actually use for this test. So that's all about locators. So the next thing is conditional weighting. So when we play it back, Rapise can play it back, first of all, at different speeds. So there's a couple of different ways we can handle playback. So first of all, when you play it back, you can tell Rapise what speed do we want to play it back. If you look down here, you'll see it. Catch objects false. Underneath that is the command interval. That says we're going to wait 1 second between every attempt. Okay, we're going to attempt a 300 millisecond wait to see if we can find something. And we're going to try 30 different times to see if we can get it. So these parameters are per test. So you can use these parameters on your test. It's not because you know this application behaves a certain way. You can also pass them through as command lines. So if you know you're running on one machine that's faster than another, you can even modify them. So this is the basics case, which is before we even get into conditional weighting, the system allows you to configure what is the general wait time, what is the number of attempts to find an object, and what is the playback speed. And so when we hit the play button, the system is going to basically use that to determine the playback speed. So for example, if we go in here and hit play, we set for Firefox, I'm just going to log out so that we're back at the starting point. If I go back and hit play, it should play back each operation roughly 1 second apart. Okay, that's pretty good. This is a pretty fast application, and it behaves pretty consistently across the different screens. Some applications that we test, like Microsoft Dynamics CRM being a good example, tends to have some very slow points, and then other parts that are pretty fast. So you log in, and the first load of the entire frame of the page can take maybe 10 to 20 seconds, but after that it's pretty fast, and then some other operations could do the same thing. So one of the things you can do is, if you know there's a slow point, and it's going to be consistently slow or relatively consistently slow, one option is you go in here and you simply add a weight. So let's add a row. And to do that, you can go to our global objects repository over here, and you can tell it to wait. So let's go look at that. It's called do sleep, and you can go in here and say sleep. And it's in milliseconds, so that's going to sleep 1 second, and maybe we want 5 seconds. So that's a way we could do that. So that's one option, make it wait 5 seconds. Okay, that's okay. But then suppose we don't know how long it's going to take, or maybe sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast, and we don't want to wait 5 seconds every time. Okay, that also is a good thing to check. We have then another option under global called do wait for. Two flavors of this. One is the do wait for an object. There's also do wait for a property of an object. This is the simpler case, which is you choose an object, for example, from the tree. Let's wait for the next object to appear, which would be the librarian cell right there, which contains the librarian name. That's what we're going to do next. So let's put a wait for there. So what you're doing now is you're telling it to wait for that object to become visible on the screen, and then do wait for property takes it one further. You can specify not just to wait for a specific object to be available, but for a specific property to be available. Maybe it has to be a certain color, maybe it has to be visible. So that's how you can do conditional weighting, and that way you're not having to modify the playback speed of the entire test, and you're not having to add random pauses. So what we would recommend is find the general playback speed that works and put that in your general settings. That's just a good starting point. And then once you've done that, customize it further by finding that any points where it breaks when playback and add in the additional weights. Okay. So that's how you would do conditional weighting. Next, control structures. So this is a good feature because you want to be able to do more than just play a set of steps. And on the first look at it, you look at Rapise and you think, wow, okay, it's a grid. And grids are really good for doing things in an order, but that's about it. So let me get rid of these rows for right now and put us back to what we had before. And let's say, imagine we wanted to run this set of steps and we wanted to do it through different logins. We want to log in maybe twice or 3 times with different data. And then we want to put into a loop. That's a natural construct. In programming, we do a for till next loop. We can do something very similar in the RVL language. We go in here and insert a row, and I'll actually set another row so you can see what I'm doing. And we use a construct, first of all, called a map. A map is basically a set of data. Hit map, hit enter. Oops, I put it in the wrong cell. Excuse me, it goes into the flow because it's a type of flow. Sorry, map. There we go, that's better. That's better. A map is basically a range of data. And in this case, we want to loop through, say, 2 times and do the same test with a different login and maybe a different book name. So we can do that very easily. We create a heading called login, password, and book. I don't need the 4th one, so let's go ahead and delete that. Login would be librarian. Password is librarian. Borrower book is book 1. Borrower, book 2. Okay, and that's our map. So that's how you define the data range. The next thing is, well, how do you create a control structure? Well, that's easy. We want the whole test, so we'll select all the rows, but you could just do part of it, and you go wrap selection in loop. Notice we also can do an if, so we can do if thens as well. So loop. There are different kinds of loop. You can loop over a variable, so you can do a simple count. You can do a loop with a condition. In this case, we're looping over a map. And I didn't give the map a name, so it's just got my map 1. You could change them in, like users and books. That's up to you. And it will loop. Obviously, it's going to loop twice, but it's still got these hard-coded values right here. So that's not good. So what we need to do is just take these and make them variables. And we take them into the map. So I just go down here, and I turn them from strings into the column headings. And the system has automatically made these bold because it knows the first row is the data column heading. You can also do a map with columns as well as rows, and then it's reversed 90 degrees. So it's up to you. It works the same way. There are also some advanced features I haven't shown, which I'm not going to do today, but you can also have it point to an external spreadsheet that's not part of this test. That's another option. You can also get data from a database or a REST web service. So where you see a spreadsheet here that's storing the data, that isn't the only data source. You could loop through anything else, like a database, REST service, or a third-party TSV file, CSV file, or a spreadsheet. So let's go back in here though and just finish up what we're doing. We're going to replace the logins, which were hard-coded, with the variables. And we also want to verify that the message that we log in on the top right is also the same. So we also want to replace that, otherwise it won't match and we'll throw an error. Okay, librarian, and we're going to call that login. And then we want to create a book. I'm going to hard-code the genre of book for right now. I don't want to have to change that. A question came in while we're doing through the chat window. The system does use Excel behind the scenes, but it does not require Excel to be installed. We have a third-party Excel user interface module, so you do not need to have the Excel application on any of the machines. It does use the Excel file format, so it's an XLSX file. You can open it in Excel if you do have Excel installed, but everything you're seeing today would not require Excel to be installed on the machine. That's a good question. And that was deliberate because a lot of test machines don't have Office installed. Why pay for Office when you don't need to? And here we are just changing the book name. And verify the name is book. Fine. Yes, and that also needs to be changed here. So I've basically parameterized it while we're talking so that everywhere I had hard-coded values, it's now variables. And I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to hit play. Before I hit play, it makes sure my application is ready. Someone asked about GWT. Yes, we do have this built-in library for GWT and GWT-EXT. We also support React, Angular. We support most common web frameworks, Bootstrap, and various other things. And in the Q&A, we'll get more into some of the questions. So we've got our test ready to go. We're going to loop through twice. Let's hit play and see what happens. And let's quickly go to the browser so we can see it. And hopefully it will work. Now, my memory is of this application is going to fail in the second iteration because when you log in as a borrower, it doesn't have permissions to create a book, but we'll see. Oh, it failed. Okay, why did it fail? Error running cop name, unable to find column book 1 in map my 1. Okay, so there's something wrong in my test, and that's always the challenge when you're doing things while talking. Param name, my map. Book. Let's have a look. Could I find column book 1? Oh, hold on. I've probably got the word book 1 instead of book somewhere. Let's see. That looks right. That looks right. Do click. Book 1. That looks right. Get the text. Verify the text equals that. Let's see again. Is this here message? Oh, I see. Let's have a look on the app. Book 1. It may be picking up the wrong row. Okay, I'm not going to debug this right now, but basically, I've made some mistake here in what I was doing. But basically, you can parameterize it to set the text and create the book, and it will run through multiple times. So that's how you would do a loop. And we also do have the option, you notice it stopped when it found an error. Sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you want to keep going. And if you want to do that in the settings of Rapise, and I think most tools will be the same, you can go into the settings, and there are global settings, and then there are test settings. The test settings include, do you want to stop on error? And it's set to true, and you could decide, let's make that false. So that way it would have kept going into the second loop and would try to log in as a second user. And when tests fail, it'll either fail because there's something wrong in your test, or it'll fail because your application didn't do what was expected. Okay, so let's go back to our test. And the next thing we want to talk about is assertions. So actually, before we do that, I forgot to show you what an if-then looks like. In Rapise, you can also wrap an if-then. So if you wanted to only do certain things, for example, if we wanted to take this login section, I'll just put it down here not to mess up my test. I'll put it down here. And let's say we wanted to only do that on a certain condition. So we'll go here, and we'll do copy, and we'll paste it right here, like that. You could wrap that in a condition. You just go select the rows, wrap in an if, and there's your condition. And right now it's checking to see if TBD equals TBD, which they will obviously match. And so you could decide, do I want to replace that with a variable? Is it a map? Is it an object? Is it something on the screen? Is it a hard-coded value? So you can check if a output from a test matches something hard-coded. You can test if something that you pass through in the map, like the book name or the login, matches something on the screen. So there's different comparison options right here as well. So you can do an if-then, you can do a loop, and you can also nest a loop in an if-then. You can also nest the loop in a loop or an if in an if. So it's completely flexible and lets you create complex control structures. So again, just so our test continues to work, I'm going to remove these right now, delete the rows. And if you didn't want to delete them, you can also use a comment to comment them out. So we do support commenting as well. Okay, great. So that's control structures, a loop and an if-then. So the next thing would be assertions. We've actually done this already. So if you remember when we played it back, it's got two assertions built in. It's got this assertion, did I log in with the right login name? And the second assertion I have is, did I actually create the book with the same name that I expected? And the assertions in Rapise come in 4 rows, and basically what that does is basically an if-then. So the assertion is, first of all, that's the message, so verify that I did log in correctly. The second action is get the text of the book 1 cell, and then verify that the output, which was the text, equals that parameter, and that parameter comes from the map, and that map is the book right here. And so what it's saying is, does the contents of that cell equal book 1? And then when you play it the second time, does the contents of that cell equal book 2? But I didn't create this by hand. When I recorded the test, it built it for me. And so if you want to see that in action again, we'll just do another quick recording. So we go back to the application, I'm logged in, and that's visible. So let's say I wanted to verify the home link, for example, the navigation bar. So I go back into record. And once it brings up the recorder, I can show you again a bit more detail. What I did is I hovered the mouse over and I use this verify option. Now one thing we do is we use these keystrokes. The control 1 is to verify, control 2 will do a learn of the current object the mouse is over, control 5 will bring up the spy. And we do that because you can actually click this button and then click on it, but it's slow. It's much faster and convenient to just hover the mouse over wherever you want and then use the keyboard to do control and 1 to bring it up. And we're now going to verify what's the contents, and there's different verification options we have: the bitmap, the black and white bitmap, the class, the CSS class that goes with it, positional X and Y coordinates, is it enabled, URL, page window, page title, things like that. And then the text. We want the text, so I'll just choose text, hit OK, and that's a verification. And so that's how you build a very simple verification. I'll put it at the end. And you might decide, well, that's a very literal test. Is it home? Maybe I want to see if it contains it. Well, that's okay. Once you've recorded something, you can check, does output 1 contains home? And that way, if you have spaces, or maybe it's got some other information either side of the word home before or after, you might want to make it a more fuzzy test. So we would recommend that you use the built-in verification option to at least build your assertion, and then you can customize how it's doing the assertion. Alternative, if you want to, you can go in here and you could say, I'm going to use my own assertion, and you can just do assert and put enter, and it will let you build one. I, for one, find that a little bit slower to use. I'll let Rapise build it for me and then tweak it afterwards. But really, it's up to you. So let's delete that, and let's delete that. So that's how you do assertions. Delete row. Okay. So the next thing, and as you can see, I would say adding an assertion is as easy as clicking on a button. You do Control-2, pick the property, hit the button, it gets added to the test, it gets added in the flow of what you're doing, and then you can go back on and improve it afterwards. And that's the thing about recording. Recording and playing isn't going to do test automation for you, but it's a good way to build a quick flow out, and then you can go back and improve the automation iteratively. So that will be a good way of using it. Number 5, modification without redo. So unfortunately, as we all know, applications change and the tests need to change. And so you might need to change the flow. And in Rapise, there's several different ways of doing that. So for example, one thing you could do is simply say, well, let's change the flow. And let's go back in here and let's take this section here up to there. And we're gonna copy that or cut that, and we're going to put it at the end. Now, this is not a very sensible thing to do, honestly, because you're basically doing it in the wrong order and it won't work. But if you wanted to do that, you could do that. So end. So that's a way where you could take a piece of test from here and paste it at the end. So that's how you would modify the flow. And obviously, another thing you might decide is, well, this is a bit messy. I would like to have my login part somewhere else. So you could take this section, say the login. Let's take that section up to here. This is the section that verifies I've logged in, basically. It does the login, click, enters the username, password, clicks the button, verifies that I logged in, and let's copy that. Copy selection. And I can add a new sheet. And I can create a sheet called login. So if you know you're going to be moving things around, you can make your test more modular. So once you've created a very simple test using record and play, in reality, you're probably going to start modularizing like this. So you create a login sequence like that. And then once you've got that, you can then go to RVL and just call your sheet. Do play sheet. So instead of having all this stuff, let's get rid of all this for right now. I'll clean this up. Delete rows. I can go in here and say do play sheet instead. And the sheet name is login. So I've replaced that whole test I had with now a call to the login test right here. The only thing I'll need to do is, because I've taken away my map, I'll need to put this back as a string just for now. You can pass values through to the sheet using variables, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. So I'll just leave those. I'll put these back in as they were just for now. Okay. Okay, make that a string. Okay, so that's how you would take a section of the test, put it in here, and let's say we wanted to create the login test. We could do the same thing. We'll create a section called logout. And we want to record that section again. So we now just want to record the logout step. So you can record just portions of a test. You haven't got to do it in one whole flow. So unlike older record and play tools, where you basically created one whole set of actions and then it was kind of this brittle thing you'd created, you can record just pieces as you need. So I'm going to now record just the end part. So let's go back into the recorder, and I'm going to choose record, and I'm now going to build just the logout piece. Brings up the recorder. Once it comes up, I'm going to click logout. There you go, and I'm going to hit finish. Okay, and I go back to Rapise, and I'm going to append it. Oh, I should insert it here. There we go. There's logout. Now it's only one step, so it's probably a bit much, but still it shows you the concept. I'll take RVL, go to action. I can go to RVL, and I can do play sheet, and I can choose logout. So basically, I've now got a test that consists of two components, two sub scenarios. Basically, one to log in, one to log out. And the next thing I might create is a create book, and then I put that in the middle. So once you're actually creating a real test, it's a good practice to basically create sheets and have sections and then call them. And that way, if you go back and have to redo a section like the login sequence, it's easier to see where you have to record. You go back here and you go, oh yeah, I've got to fix this. So those are some best practices for how you would dynamically fix the flow and modify without redoing the whole thing. So you just record the bits you need, replace the bits you need. That's how you would replace the flow. That's when the application's workflow changes. The second case might be the workflow is still the same, but the UI has changed. So the login button is not the login button, but on the other hand, the flow is the same. So we have an even better solution for that. You don't have to record anything. You just go back in here and say, well, let me re-record the login button. You click on it, and you can first of all flash it to see, does it even exist on the page? And if it does, it will tell you. If not, it will warn you that it doesn't. Let's see. Oh, it does. So I don't need to record it. But if it can't find it, I can do relearn, do Control-2 over the button, and it will now remap it. So redoing the flow is as easy as just recording the section and replacing it, or drag and dropping if you want to make it by hand. Re-recording the object is as quick as flashing it to see if it still matches, relearning it if it doesn't. Obviously, if you're using smart locators and you've done that well, this shouldn't happen very often, but sometimes a page changes significantly that, however, with the best will in the world, you have to record an object. And so that's how you would do that. So that's how you would redo the flow and redo the objects. Next, steps. How do you do reusable steps? We've done that already. So how you would create reusable steps is exactly as I showed you. You would create a login, log out, create book sequence, and then each of those would appear here. Let me get rid of this thing. Delete. Okay, so that's how you create usable steps. Now there is another way in Rapise where you can use code to do that, but we're going to carry that question forward when we get to the section on code and edge cases. So the next thing would be cross-browser support. Cross-browser support. Can we play on multiple browsers? So absolutely. So what we have right now is a test that logs in and a test that logs out. Okay, well let's just make sure that works first of all. So we're back in Firefox and we're going to hit play. Right here, and hopefully it will work and play. Very good. Log in, log out. That's simple. That's easy enough. Well, guess what? We want to try it on Firefox. Now we want to try it on Chrome. Okay, how do we do that? Easy peasy. Go to the top right, choose the browser, Chrome, and also note that in this case, we can do Chrome, Firefox, and IE natively. We can also connect to anything using Selenium and then run Chrome, Edge, Safari as well, or a headless browser like Phantom, or Source Labs, or Cobaton, or any of the cloud platforms, or a mobile browser like Safari running on iOS. So the great thing is we can play it back through any device that can run on Selenium. For recording, we typically recommend using one of these 3 native browsers. Those have the recording option because we can listen to the events. It's much easier to build the tests. So we recommend record on these top 3, play back through any of them. So I'll just play back through Chrome to illustrate. Okay, hit play. It's going to fire up Chrome, which should come forward. Here we go. That should do the same thing. And there we go. Great. So that's how you play it on a different browser. One further thing we can do is, let's say you wanted to start the browser in different modes. Like some applications have weird authentication issues where if you log in the second time, it remembers your session and it gets complicated. Some of the Microsoft apps will show you a completely different login page if you've been there before. So to avoid that, you might want to start the browser in incognito mode every time, or private mode. So to do that, we do what's called browser profiles. And you can define different versions of the same browser. So here we have, for example, IE, and then we have IE running in safe mode with all the add-ons turned off. Similarly, you could start, I think it's Firefox can start in incognito mode, Chrome can go in private mode. So you can actually have the anything you want to do to start the browser, you can put in here. Another common example is if you wanted to record a test on a version of Chrome running in the same size as a mobile device so that the application's in responsive mode, you can pass through the size of the browser and it will launch in, say, an iPhone size. You can record the browser test here quickly, and then you can play it back through Selenium and an Appium to run it through on iOS Safari. So sometimes when you're recording, you want to have it's easier to record on a desktop machine, even though it's going to be on a size on a mobile browser. So having the ability to launch it with specific X and Y or height and width parameters is really useful. And so we've used that a lot. So you create these profiles based on any of the browsers. So that's the cross-browser support. Next would be reporting. And we haven't done a lot of reporting so far. We've mostly done reporting around playback and results. So if you go to Rapise, that's a report. It's a bunch of lines, green if it passes, red if it fails. If it fails, as you saw earlier on with a failure, it gives you a hyperlink so you can see exactly where in the sheet did it fail. Well, that's good. However, maybe you want to get some screenshots. Well, that's really easy too. You can go in here and you can say, let's get some screenshots. All you need to do is go into the properties of the test and change it to do screenshots. So we go to test, settings, playback right here. Here, where is it? Capture execution. Yes, we want that. Capture, including the report. Yes, we want that too. That's okay. And now we're going to hit play. And we have Chrome running, which is fine. So we'll hit, and let's go back to Chrome. And it's going to play back the exact same test. It's just a log in, log out. And this time we're going to see it take a screenshot. And it's done. Here we go. We've got screenshots. You can expand it to see. There's a screenshot. Look at that. And that's pretty good. And even one better than that, we can do what's called a screen flow, where you can see it in a web page like that. I'm just going to scroll through it quickly. Okay, so that is how you would do that. Now, you might have a question, which would be, that's really nice. I know my test passed in this case, and imagine it failed. I've got some screenshots. I want to run 1,000 tests and see which ones passed, which ones failed. How do I do that? And that's also a really important part of reporting. It's not just for one test, it's the whole thing. That's where SpiraTeam comes in. So SpiraTeam is our test management solution that goes with Rapise, and it has really good reporting. And this reporting is designed to give you reports across different tests and different results. So if I choose this project here, it lets you see things like the current count of test cases. It lets you see the range of defects. It lets you see here, a good example would be, what's the time-based range of tests being passed and failed? And are we getting better or worse? And if you look at this example, you might be concerned that the number of greens has pretty much gone the same and is now getting worse. And we're actually getting more NAs and more fails and more blocks and more not runs. Actually, less not runs, but more NAs and more blocked. So that's not really a good example if it was a real project, but it is exactly what's happening. So these are the kind of tools you want to be able to see what is the current state, what's passed and failed, like this, what's the trend. And you've also other graphs in the system like this, where you can run and see what's going on across an entire project. So here's a project, and here's all the test metrics together. Test progress, test activity, that same graph we saw before, test status, what's the requirement, test coverage, and this is your enterprise test management. So wouldn't it be great if all the test results from Rapise would flow into this? Well, the good thing is they do. So if I'm going to run some tests, I can have them appear inside of SpiraTest, and they will now appear here, and you can see all the different tests, all my regression tests, and what's passed and what's failed. And then if I click drill down, I'll get more details. So to do that, I'll show you quickly. We'll go in here. We've got our test already, and I'm going to basically save it to Spira. And I'll do this quickly, but basically it's uploading the test and the data sheet and all the various test assets that go with it. It stores them in Spira and it versions them, so you don't have to. It's done. And when we go back to Rapise, all we need to do, we can quit out Rapise right now. And we'll go back into SpiraTest, and we're going to schedule the test to run. So let's look. There's our sample codeless test we just created. It's not run yet. And we'll go into a test sets module, and that's where we do scheduling. And the focus of today is not really SpiraTest, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining what I'm doing. But the short answer is I'm creating a simple test suite, and I'm going to schedule my one test to run right now. And in real life, I'd probably be scheduling a lot of tests to run on a different date and time, maybe running every day, running after the build has passed, things like that. There's a lot more options than we're doing. We're just doing the simplest case, which is run a single test against the release on a single machine. My machine's called TARDIS because I'm a Doctor Who fan, and I'm going to add my test case, and it's in the regression folder, and it's called Codeless. There it is. I add it. There we go. Good. And I want to run it right now. Don't want to keep you guys waiting. So we'll hit save. It's a one-time run. And that's all I have to do. And I just need to do one more thing though, which is to start the launcher. So we have an execution agent called Rapise Launcher. That's responsible for running the tests remotely on the different machines. It's connecting all the time and checking for tests. It also has a screenshot option, which we've got turned on. It tells you what machine it is, so that way it knows which test it's looking for, and the URL to connect to the SpiroTest instance. That's all good. And it runs. This one is set to run every minute. I'm going to force it to run check right now, just to avoid waiting. And it's going to start. And it's going to go to Chrome, so I'm going to move over to Chrome, just so you can see what's going on. And it's going to do exactly the same thing. It's going to log in. It's going to verify the user is logged in with the right login name in the top right. And it's going to log out. So it's really simple. Now the difference is, whereas before I ran it through Rapise, now it's through SpiroTest. If I hit refresh, it's passed. And if I go here, there's a test run. We'll go to test runs. There's our new test run. Every time you run this test now, you can have a new test run. So if you run this 1,000 times, you'll have 1,000 entries here. So whereas everything on Rapise, it sits on one machine, if you have different servers and different computers all running tests, this is your central hub for all the test results. And when you click on it, you'll see exactly the same results, the past, the length of time, any test parameters, and you'll see here exactly the same thing as the screen flow. You'll get the screenshots embedded correctly into the test report automatically, as well as key information here, what parameters we used, and you can do data-driven testing from SpiroTest as well. And there's a lot more functionality available, but in its nutshell, it gives you the integrated reporting across thousands of test results at the same time. So that's a very long answer to reporting. We have reporting in Rapise for the individual tests, and SpiroTest gives you the enterprise reporting on top of that. So, okay, we've written our test, we've recorded it, we played it, we've reported on it, it's all looking good, but we want to do something that's not so easy to do in the Codeless methodology, or maybe I'm a programmer, I like the layout of RVL, I like the flow, it's easy to maintain, but when I start doing if-thens and branches, I just naturally think more in code, which is perfectly fine. How would we write code? So very easy is the answer, it turns out. So let's say, in fact, not only can we write code, we can even turn this into code. So let's say I wanted to do my login stuff and I wanted to do it in code rather than in this table. Well, I can select the rows, I can right click and go copy as JavaScript, go to my users file, that's where all the code lives, and I'll wrap it in a function, so I'll just call it login. I'll do paste, and it's turned the login and verification of the login, which was these 10 lines here, into 6 lines of JavaScript automatically. So that's pretty good. Now, let's say I want to log in with different users. The benefit of JavaScript is it's really easy to do that. I can go in here and say, username, password. And all I have to do is replace the text that you see here with the same thing, like that, and like that. There we go. Perfect. So now I've turned my codeless 10 lines into some JavaScript. How do I use this? Oh, the answer is really easy. In the same way that I can play a sheet, I can go in here and go to action, and I can go to my functions, and I can say login, hit enter, and my parameters are right here. So I can mix and match code and non-code or codeless. So maybe I want to turn that, and it's a string, and I want it to be, librarian, and that's how you would use code. The advantage of this would be you can do everything in code sometimes more easily, sometimes things are harder. It depends on what you're familiar with. As a programmer, though, one of the nice features is it is a full IDE, so you can go in here and say, oh, what's the object name? What are the options? So if you use the Visual Studio or IntelliJ or Eclipse, it's got everything you'd expect in a modern IDE. You've got code folding like that, so you can minimize and maximize. You can go over here and just drag things like that. It's got a built-in debugger, in fact, so you want to play it back, you can watch variables, you can do debugging. There's a whole bunch of advanced features that you get from using the code side of things as well. So just because you're doing codeless for most of the work, you don't lose the power of code when you need it. And some of our customers do everything in RVL, they never touch the code. Other customers, they're programmers, they do everything in code. And other users, again, are in between, have a bit of each. It's really up to you. Depends on what makes the most sense. What's the most efficient for your business case, and the skill set of your team. and it may not be the same on every project. Okay, so that's how you would use code. And then lastly, but not least, in the 10 things you need to have, continuous integration. How do you run these things every time your build passes and your CI runs? Well, that's very easy. There's two ways. Rapise does directly integrate with Jenkins or TFS. And in fact, any tool that can run a command line, it can be executed by. The second option, which is the one we usually recommend, if you're using Spirotest and Rapise already, guess what? It's even easier than that. All you do is you get your test set and you tell it to schedule to run on build. So if we go back to our test set that we were looking at, before I schedule it to run one time, I just choose it to schedule on build. I hit the checkbox to yes, and I choose a delay. If I want to run right after the build, that's fine. If I know that the app takes a few minutes to start up, I can put in a delay here and hit save. Once I do that, anytime a build hits this release 1, it's going to fire off this test set. So then you're going to say, okay, so how do I get the build into release 1? Very easy. We have a plugin for Jenkins and TeamCity and TFS and Bamboo on their respective marketplaces. And every time you run a build on those tools, what's going to happen is it's going to record a build right here against the release. Right here. So here's some example builds we have. Let's look at this last one. Here's the build that came in. This was a successful build. Here's the log from Jenkins. It succeeded. There's some code revisions, all the usual build stuff. And because it was against release 1, most importantly though, it will know to automatically schedule that test set. So what happens is it's release 1, iteration 3 in this case. So when a test set is scheduled against that, it's going to run automatically and then send the results back. So for CI integration, all you do basically is plug in SpiroTeam into your build server, connect Rapise to SpiroTeam, and that's it. Away you go. And that is the 10th thing. So we've gone through all of the 10 things that a Codeless Test Automation tool should have. And again, if you're interested in the background to all of this, please, I refer you back to the original blog from Angie Jones and also the white paper that we wrote. Feel free to look at both of those. And if you have any questions, we also are doing more webinars on some of these topics in detail. But now I'd like to hand it over to any questions. So we've got about 5 minutes left of our runtime. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat window. I've got some already, and I will read those ones out as well. So the first question was, there's a lot here, sorry. Let's see. Does this tool have a dependency on using Excel? The answer is no. It uses Excel file format, but it is not using the Excel application, doesn't require it. Question was, is it open source? It's a commercial tool because we have to make some money, but much of it is open. So it's an open platform. So for example, you look at these object tree and say, what's an object? How do I get behind that? Well, everything's stored in standard file formats. So for example, the objects are just a JSON file. There's my object tree. The user functions are just JavaScript. The profile is JSON. The main code behind it is JSON. RVL, this codeless language, is actually a spreadsheet format, and even the engine behind Rapise is all written in JavaScript. So it's a very open, extensible platform. So the source code is available, and so in that sense, there is open source aspects to it, but it's a commercial tool. It's not free. Does it work with GWT? That is. Yes, we've got a GWT library built in. It's one of the built-in libraries that we have. If you go to the libraries option in Rapise, you can actually see what libraries are available, and you can verify which ones we use. So go to Tools, Libraries, and you can see different libraries will pop up while it's doing that. The next question was, is it available for macOS? Currently, it's Windows only. It can play back against a Mac using Selenium and Safari or iOS, but the actual core IDE itself is currently only Windows. So here are the different libraries we have. So we do have libraries for GWT, GWT Extensible, even YUI. Not so much anymore. We have libraries for desktop apps, things like Qt Framework. We also have Java, Swing, AWT. We also have libraries for some common applications like Dynamics CRM, Dynamics AX, Salesforce. So there's lots of different libraries we've built into the system to make automating different applications better. So we're focusing on some of the larger, more complex packaged apps like Dynamics and Salesforce that tend to be hard to automate. Can we see the underlying code was the question. Yes. Doctor Who, yes. I do like Doctor Who. Can we see the underlying code? The answer is yes. All the underlying code is basically either in JavaScript if it's or JSON if it's like this. If it comes to this actual sheet, there's no code behind this sheet. It's actually a set of actions and objects. And so when you say click, it's calling one of our libraries to do a click on something. And when you click on, for example, let's say the login link, it's looking in this object tree over here for the login link. So there's no code as such, but there is a JSON file that will tell you what is a login right here. So it's not code, but a JSON model. So the model is visible, you can see that, but not necessarily the code itself. But you can obviously convert it into code like I did with the login step really easily. And if you wanted to access this RVL file, you can always open it externally if you have Excel installed. As I said, you don't need Excel to use it, but if you do have Excel, it is right there. Thanks for watching today's webinar. I hope it was interesting and useful. For more videos on software testing, please check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Inflectra Corporation. Have a great day.